Welcome, Suzanne. I am so excited to have you here today. I'm feeling so blessed because I think you are doing divorce different. You are the epitome of that. You are living it. And in the intro, I let my listeners know just a little piece of information about you living under the same roof as your ex husband and his wife and your children. So we'll get more into that. But I am always so grateful for my guests who have gone through something. I'm sure it wasn't all easy, and that you're sharing that story. You're an author, you've got a great book out there that sadly I was not able to read, just ordered it, haven't gotten it yet, but I believe, is it called uh, Divorce by Design?
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Suzanne, welcome. And would you just share your story with our listeners? How did you divorce different and what led you to it?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me on and for having this great forum for people to come and share. So my story is that about 13 years ago, my now ex-husband and I decided to end our marriage. And, it wasn't a decision we made that day, of course. There were a few years before that where we were just really struggling. And, but I couldn't figure out how to leave. It just seemed like with two small children that we had at the time, it just didn't seem like an acceptable alternative for me to leave the family, to break up the family. And so, I like thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and I just felt really trapped. But I started to sort of challenge some of the assumptions that most of us have about divorce, whether we know that we have these assumptions or not. And one of them is that when people get divorced, they don't live together anymore. If you think of divorced people, maybe you know some who live together, but most of them don't. And it was a real sticking point because here we were with two small children. They were 2 and 4 when we separated. We had a house that we loved, in a town that we loved, on a street that we loved. And it just felt like this is not something that we want to give up. And so we decided to challenge that assumption and just say, you know what, we could get divorced and still live here together. We can still raise our kids together under the same roof. And so that's what we decided to do.
So I applaud you for that because I'm even thinking, like, we're hearing tidbits of this, of people doing this or nesting. Were you 13 years ago, or was it strictly born out of your mind? And I mean, I can't imagine how your ex, you were married to at the time, what his reaction was.
Yeah. Well, I think that his reaction, he was very afraid, I think, of losing our house and losing our family and losing, all of what we had together. And when I said, like, we don't have to change any of that, we could actually just stay here together. How about that? And what if we just raised our kids together but got divorced? And what if we didn't, change our situation? Like, he was on my health insurance at the time. Like, what if we could just keep all of that the same but get divorced? And so he actually, because that was able to sort of put to rest what his most immediate fears were, he just he just went with it, and I don't think either one of us, we couldn't see ahead 13 years,
Right.
but just in the moment, it was like, well, let's not shake this up too much. Let's keep some of this stuff. And so he was pretty willing to try.
Well, and Suzanne, it's such a good option because most of my clients, their number one fear if they have kids is not seeing them every day. Number two, they don't want to lose their home.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even if people thought through, well, why don't we for the first year do it like this? I mean, I don't know that I've even ever offered that up to some of my clients. Say, have you ever thought of this?
Yeah.
So, because it just seems like you kind of have to hate your spouse, right? You're getting divorced, you hate them, and that's not how it is, and that's not how my clients are in general. I have the most amazing clients who want to work together, but I can imagine in some ways it was easier, right? Like you didn't have to worry about those big things. But were there things about it that were pretty difficult too? Like I can only imagine when you started dating.
Yeah. Yes. So definitely there's lots that's been easier. I mean, we have so much flexibility, and especially when the kids were young, we didn't need babysitters. We didn't have a rigid schedule. So it wasn't like, oh, I never can go out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. We kept it all very loose, and someone was always here. And so it was easy to travel for work or go out for a night. For sure, there were challenges in the beginning, things were pretty tense. So
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you're still living together means you're just coming up to face and like living in that tense feeling all the time. I mean, when I moved into the guest room, that gave me a feeling of space, like
Yeah.
that I had somewhere to go that was mine. And then the bedroom we had shared became his. So we both had a little bit of space, and then ultimately we added on to the house. So now I have a whole, apartment essentially, that is mine. So over time we got the space. Yes, dating it's interesting, right? He met his now wife almost right away, and was very clear with her from the beginning that this was it's a not negotiable. I live
Mm-hmm.
with my ex and kids, and that's how it's going to stay. And she's a very open-minded person and was willing to just explore it. And she I mean, of course she was a little hesitant, but she said,
Sure.
let me figure this situation out. And she was willing to try. And a lot of people wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I've had, I've dated lots of different people. I've had relationships, some of them a year or more. People react in lots of different ways. Some people don't want anything to do with it, and they are suspicious of it, and I don't blame them. I mean, some people
Right.
are just like, no, unless you're like totally out of this, I don't, I'm not interested in that. Other people, I find especially people whose parents have divorced are more open, because
Interesting. Yeah.
if they had a bad experience or a very challenging childhood because of their divorce, and that was the case for my ex's wife Anna, they see it differently. They see that we are trying to do something differently for our kids and how our kids will grow up within our divorce. And so they're sometimes a little bit more likely to say, well, I will see what it's like.
Right. Well, and I do think it's probably about the best thing you can do for your kids. And which leads me, I was curious when you started talking, were you or your ex-husband children of divorce? Had you been through it?
No,
No.
neither of us. My parents were married for over 50 years, and his parents were married for a very long time. His father died when he was, I think, just in college or just out of college, but they were married up until then. So neither one of us
Mhm.
actually had really any experience with divorce. I didn't know anybody really that was close in my life that was divorced. And I sometimes wonder if that's why I didn't have as many. I mean, I certainly knew how people typically do it,
Right.
but I didn't feel the need to like live within that. I just,
Are you that kind of a person? That's what I want to know, because I don't know that I would think outside of the box like that. Even though it's people want to do what's best for their kids, and it's not going to be for everyone. And like you were saying, it's kind of evolved for you where now you're not in a guest room.
yeah,
You have kind of decided to add an apartment on. Is that what it is?
yeah,
Where you,
yeah,
but your kids have freedom. I mean, your
yes.
kids have parents as if you were married.
Yeah. And there's three of us, three parents.
And does your ex-husband and his new wife, do they have children too?
No, there's no additional children. So
Okay.
just our two kids who are now teenagers. I mean, we started this when they were 2 and 4. They're now 16 and 18, and my son's about to go to college. But for 13 years, they have had 3 involved active
Right.
parents. So yeah, that's been amazing for them and honestly for all of us.
Well, and it would be so interesting for me to ask your kids, what did this feel like? I mean, I almost feel like, did you even have to? I mean, they were pretty little, so I don't know how much you would have to explain, but did you have to really even explain?
We did explain, my son, he did cry when we told him that, we said we're
Okay.
not going to be married anymore. He couldn't really express why he was upset, but he was saying, I just want you to be married.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that we, in talking to him a couple years later, he came home one day and told me, he said, guess what, Mom? You know what? When some people get divorced, they get 2 separate houses. Like, he thought our situation was normal, and other
Right.
people had like the weird situation because this is just how he grew up. And now he actually did use this as the topic of his college essays when he was applying for college this past year. And he talked about how growing up this way has helped him be more creative in terms of problem solving, and that there's not 2 options. There's
Right.
another way to solve problems. And I'll tell you, he's quite a deal maker. So whenever you're negotiating with him, he's sort of famous for saying, hear me out, because he's always going to present us with some other ideal that works better for him.
That is amazing. And what a gift that you gave your children, that you were able to do this. And okay, so one's off in college.
Yeah.
And then you've
Not
got,
yet. I'm still holding on to him.
oh, you're still holding on. He wrote his essay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I suppose, do you just kind of not look too far into the future and just, this is how it is now? Or are
Yeah.
you thinking, well, maybe I won't stay here after they're gone?
Yeah, we had talked about, once they're both in college, that maybe we'll sell the house. We live in a very high tax area of New Jersey. But kids come home from college, right?
Mhm.
And so, I don't know that we'll sell it right away when they're both, gone. But at some point, it would seem likely that maybe we won't keep living together, that I will get my own place of some kind. But yeah, right now, I'm just not that worried about it. And when we started it, what we agreed was we will keep doing this as long as it works well for all of us.
Yeah.
We could not have predicted 15,
Right.
13 years, 15 years. But it has continued to work. And, of course, there are challenges and blips along the way, but never anything that made it seem like there was a better option than just continue to work it out and stay together.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So I have a question. I don't know, this might be personal, but do you own the house together actually, or does one person rent from the other?
Yes, we own it together. We owned it. We were married when we bought it. So we own it together. And, we have a legal agreement for what will happen if we sell it.
Right.
But we continue to own it together.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because a lot of my clients don't realize, because you're not thinking that way. You're thinking of dividing everything up, and it doesn't, the light bulb doesn't turn on that you can own a house with someone you're not married to.
Yeah. And I know other people who have gotten divorced and one person has moved out, and yet they continue to own the house together because they have reasons that involve their finances or whatever. The house has equity. They want to keep building it, and they've decided that it makes sense, and they work it out in other ways with their financial arrangement together. But sometimes it doesn't make sense to sell the house for either person.
Exactly. And now we're looking more creatively with the interest rates being higher and people not wanting to refinance. So people are thinking about that a little bit more. But yeah, there are all kinds of different reasons where you can own your home together.
Yeah.
So okay, so there I want to ask you about how to help people kind of start thinking like you, but I have to ask, how did people react? I mean, I'm such a people pleaser. I'm working on that. I'm being coached on not being a people pleaser. But people must have been, are you nuts? I mean, I don't know were they very supportive and thought it was a great idea?
Yeah, it's interesting because I also am a pleaser, also working on it with a coach and my therapist. But I do want to please people, but I also have this side of me that's like, you know what? Unless you overstep, then I no longer care. So people, everyone thought it was crazy and told us this terrible idea.
Everyone, not one person.
I don't think I met a single person in the first 2 years, at least, who ever said, "Hey, you're really onto something there." Everybody said, "Nope, that's a terrible idea." Whether they were friends, family, strangers, professionals, everybody. And I don't know. I just kind of said, "Well, I think it's a good idea."
Yep. And so did that lead you to write your book? What led you? Yeah.
I really think it was partly people's responses, because it made me realize that, like, truly, that's why I call myself a divorce revolutionary, because everyone's responses told me this is not just like a little tweak on the norm. Like, this is something different. And even nesting, the more typical type of nesting, which is also revolutionary, but where you keep the kids in the middle and the parents move in and out, is still a little different from what we're doing, where we just said, well, you know what? We're still a family. We're just not married to each other, and we can just both live here. I mean, we didn't see any reason for anyone to move in and out. So people's reactions were part of what helped me see, like, this is something very different. And I also just want to say, in terms of your question, like, what do people need to think about it? First of all, you don't need to do it my way, right? Most people don't want to, or couldn't for whatever reason. It's not about living together necessarily. That's just like one flavor,
Right.
but it's about thinking very carefully about every single step in the divorce process and challenging the assumptions that underlie those steps, and asking yourself, is this actually necessary and helpful to us to do this thing? I mean, one of the examples I give is, if you go to any kind of divorce professional, usually one of the questions that you're going to be asked is, how do you plan to split up the holidays with the children? Which is a very legitimate question, but there's an assumption in it. And that is that you'll split up the holidays. And we said, well, we don't want to split up the holidays. We want to spend the holidays together with our children. And so, but if you're just, you're overwhelmed with so many questions, so many decisions, so many things you have to think about, plus all of your emotions, that when people ask you questions, especially if they are knowledgeable about divorce or you've hired them to help you with divorce, it's very natural to think that when they ask you a question, you have to come up with an answer that sort of fits into the box.
Right. Which this is going to totally make me better at what I do. And I will say, when I do go over the holiday schedule, I say, how do you usually spend the holidays? Do you want to continue to do them together? Do you think you could do that for your kids? And sadly, some of my parents can't see past the anger to the other parent. And that's okay. But I think one of the key things that you said that just hit me was that you still want it to be a family.
Yeah.
And that is what kids need. I don't know. Have you ever watched the movie Split and Split Up by Ellen Bruno?
I don't think so.
Oh, they're so good. But it shows what kids go through during divorce. And then it goes out 10 years and interviews the same kids. And there was one kid in particular who did extremely well. And he was the one that called everyone his family. He's like, yeah, my family's different. I have, a stepmom and but they were still a family
Yeah.
and they did everything together. And so you can do it that way too and be
Yeah.
successful. So I love that you mentioned that. That's so
Yeah.
key and so important. Okay. So give my listeners a little bit of advice on thinking outside the box. So if I'm going to be thinking about this, if I'm going to be helping people, and I mean through the whole divorce process,
Yeah.
because, I will say this is legally how the state of Minnesota wants you to divide your assets. This is your divorce.
Yeah.
And, it could be if they did something far-fetched that a judge may not agree.
Yeah.
So far, knock on wood, when they're in agreement and they understand what they're doing, it's worked out. So how can listeners keep that in the forefront of their mind and bring the other person along? Because it sounds like you kind of brought your ex-spouse into this way of
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so one of the first things to do is get very clear on the problem you're solving for. And so we're not all getting divorced for the same reasons. And so
right.
what I like to talk about in my book is don't oversolve for problems you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our case, it wasn't that we couldn't stand to be in the same room together or couldn't stand to live together. It wasn't that we couldn't co-parent together or manage our finances. It was we didn't have the kind of connection that we wanted to have with each other in order to be married. So we solved for that problem. And we didn't oversolve by selling our house and splitting our kids and like juggling the money around and all of that.
Right.
We solved the problem we had. We didn't solve other problems that we didn't have, which allowed us to keep the good parts of our relationship as a family.
Well,
we got rid of what didn't work and we kept the other stuff.
What I love about what you're saying too, this is so interesting. Sometimes I'll start a mediation with clients, and when they don't have kids, the first thing we go over is finances. And we kind of fix it. Like we go through and then they go, well, we don't even really need to be divorced because now we've got this figured out. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Sometimes I've thought if you're like fighting over finances with your spouse, if you got separate bank accounts and put a written agreement in place and all the stuff you have to do when you got to get divorced, like maybe you wouldn't have to get divorced. Maybe for some people that would solve it, as would having every other weekend off from your children might also solve some people.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. That is such a good point. And I always like to really talk through this with my clients when they come, because I do believe it. I mean, I've been married for 31 years, so I believe in it. So your point about like splitting weekends, I mean, oh, that's a good one. And if those are things that can keep them together, or at least really parenting well together,
yeah.
What great it. See, you think outside the box.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need to call you up and have you on my shoulder.
Well, and I've had a lot of people who have read my book say, this book is not just relevant for people who are getting divorced. If you applied all of the techniques in this book to your marriage, it would improve your marriage. So, I wrote it from the perspective of divorce because that's what I wanted to share. But a lot of the same things, it's about getting more creative and making intentional decisions. When we're married and we're in a family, like there's this idea that, we have to do all these family activities and spend all the weekends together and do all this stuff. Maybe not. Maybe that's not right for you. But getting back to the, what else should people think about is really creating a divorce vision. So if you could have any kind of divorce, the best possible divorce you could come up with, what would that look like? And, people often miss that step, right? Because we're not used to thinking about something that we think of as a bad thing as like a vision of how could it be actually a great thing, even if it's not what you wanted. I didn't want to get divorced. It's not like I was, going around wishing that would happen. But once it became clear to me that staying in the situation wasn't good for me or for him, I started thinking like, what could it look like that, and so we really focused on getting the distance from each other and the separation and freedom that we needed to find other connections with other people, but at the same time nurturing our family and causing it the least pain possible for everyone and leaving all of us better off. Like that
Yeah.
was our vision. And once you're very, very clear about where you're going, even if you can't get there all the way there, you can get closer than if you're just following along on the path that, you know, other people have shown you, which is often not a great, you know,
And you can
outcome.
act intentionally. I mean, it's just like I
Yeah.
write down my goals every day. It for
Yeah.
some reason just helps me stay focused on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So
Suzanne,
for every little decision, you can ask yourself, does this solve the problem we actually have, or does it contribute to solving the problem we actually have?
yeah.
And does it get us closer to this divorce vision?
Okay, so Suzanne, I have to have you on when I'm done reading your book. Would you mind coming back
I would love
on?
to come back.
I would, because this is so good, but I can't wait to read it and talk more about it.
Yeah.
So, Suzanne, I can't believe how fast this time has gone. It has flown by. But as you know, as I wind down and wrap up, I have what I call the saddle up segment, where I ask my guests, and you've given us so much good information, but if there's one little tidbit or something the listeners can do right now today for a better life or to head in the right direction, do you have something to share?
Yeah, I think it is to take what other people tell you with a grain of salt, especially when it's something that is so significantly life-changing for you, and to really get quiet and listen to what your voice is telling you, and to stick with that even when other people tell you, you know, maybe that's not a great idea. If you trust yourself, then you're more likely to come up with something that is going to be great for your life as opposed to, you know, everybody else's life.
Yeah, and you are a total example of that. So, Suzanne, if my listeners want to get in touch with you, what is the best way and how can they get your book?
Yep. So my book, Divorce by Design, is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places. They can get in touch with me on my website, SuzanneVickberg.com, on Instagram at Suzanne Vickberg, on LinkedIn, Suzanne Vickberg. I'm happy to connect with anyone in any of those places and talk about coaching or just answer questions or just connect and hear people's stories. And I would love to do that.
Well, I know that you would be beneficial for those. You've been just a great asset to me. You've made me a better mediator, and I have just thoroughly enjoyed having you on. And just for listeners, all that information will be in the show notes. So don't worry if you didn't get it written down, you'll be able to find Suzanne. So we're going to have you back, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.